It's not often that a franchise can make a good spin-off. Zelda can't do it, Mario can't do it, Sonic definitely can't do it, and Resident Evil is no exception, giving us absolute gems like Umbrella Corps, Resident Evil Gaiden, No Ninja, and everyone's favorite, Resident Evil Survivor. But today's game breaks the mold of bad RE spin-offs, giving us one of the best games that the franchise has to offer. From the gameplay to the story, Resident Evil Dead Aim is a game that has been wrongfully forgotten, and by all that I mean that this game sucks. Resident Evil is a franchise with a little something for everyone. If you like your games with a little more horror, play Resident Evil 1 or RE7. But if you're a little more zesty with it, you might enjoy some boulder punching fun with the Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 exists too, I guess. But if you're in the middle, then it's Resident Evil 4 all the way, baby, where your dreams can come true and you can truly be Ashley Savior. Anyways, there's a whole nother world of Resident Evil games, and the world of spin-offs. The success of the franchise was bound to spawn classics like Resident Evil Gaiden and Umbrella Corps, as I mentioned before. I mean, Code Veronica was cool, but a lot of people don't consider that a spin-off, including me, so for the most part we're just left with subpar games. And among these subpar games is Resident Evil Dead Aim. Released June 17th, 2003, Resident Evil Dead Aim was the fourth and final game in the Gun Survivor series, which is filled with games like Resident Evil Survivor that Capcom desperately wants us to forget about, but I'll never forget this.
Vincent? It's me, your mother.
My mother?
There was also a Dino Crisis game thrown in there for whatever reason. Also, these games were all meant for the light gun, which I didn't have and I didn't feel like emulating, so be warned when I mention it about 500 times. But as I said, Dead Aim was the final evolution in this series, if you want to call it that. It puts you on a boat to retrieve the T-virus from this dude named Morpheus. You solve puzzles, meet an unlikely friend, and of course save the day before the timer runs out. Pretty much everything a Resident Evil game needs to become, well, Resident Evil. The only reason I even played Dead Aim was because I was going to review all the games in the Gun Survivor series, but thought this deserved its own time in the spotlight. Comparing it to previous games in the franchise, it's definitely the most fleshed out. The graphics are marginally better, there's a third-person camera when you're not shooting, there's actually puzzles that weren't really present in the other games. I mean, besides getting an item and placing that on another item. Oh, and there's definitely voices in this acting.
If left by now, somewhere in America there's a kitten stuck in the tree, desperately needing your help.
You can easily tell that they wanted this to play like more of a standard Resident Evil game, and it mostly does, until you realize how bad the aiming is if you don't have a light gun. Dead Aim, more like, I can't aim. Yeah, take that. Starting the game, we're greeted with a really nice intro cutscene before the main menu. We play as Bruce, which is a soldier for the US military branch dedicated to taking down Umbrella. We learn that we're on a boat trying to retrieve the T-virus because I guess this dude named Morpheus has it. Having the boat as a setting is kind of a cool idea, and it reminds me of Resident Evil 7. Although this game is nothing like that, it's still cool to see. After exploring the boat, you'll eventually come into contact with Fong Ling, which was sent by the Chinese government for the same purpose as Bruce. She's cool, I guess. I mean, she's pretty much just dollar store Ada Wong, but for the purpose of this game, it works. Throughout the game, you're solving puzzles, fighting zombies, and even fighting Morpheus a couple of times after he takes the T-virus himself, and for whatever reason, that changes his gender. And let's just say, he ain't looking too bad. After realizing the boat is heading straight for an island, an obligatory countdown sequence begins, and Bruce and Fong have to escape. Of course, nothing is easy here, and Bruce has to fight the Tyrant 91. After running his pockets, Bruce and Fong jump off the ship and onto the island. But this is no ordinary island, because why would it be? There's actually an entire Umbrella facility on this island that Bruce and Fong explore. After some waterways and a couple of goofy enemies, like seriously, I would love to know what this is supposed to be. Dude looking like a fresh school lunch. Anyways, we find the obligatory lab underneath the facility, and oops, Morbius captures Fong, so we gotta save her before we can get to the missiles. Oh yeah, I don't think I mentioned the T-virus missiles that Morpheus is planning on launching. Now, I tell you what happens next, and we are close to the ending, but this is where I come clean and unveil what's really under the curtain. That being that I wasn't actually able to beat this game. I gave up. I had to. Along with this story being a story, the shooting controls suck with using a controller. See, I told you I'd mention it. Now, I did say earlier that this game is part of a series of games that are meant for the light gun. I also mentioned I didn't have that. Now, I was relatively okay for the most part throughout the whole game, but when it came to the second to last battle with Morpheus, I had to give up. My efforts using the gamepad were futile. Every time I tried to aim or turn around, I was getting ambushed, and if I was in a good position, I'd miss the shot anyway. I need to know who thought it would be a good idea to make Morpheus the reincarnation of Dick Grayson. No Resident Evil villain should be able to compete in an Olympic competition and have a good chance of winning. Anyway, I'll still explain what happens. After that fight, stuff goes about as expected. Fong and Bruce try and escape, and Morpheus goes Morbid mode and becomes a giant blob pretty much, and those missiles I mentioned? Yeah, he just takes the impact. Don't worry though, our heroes of the story escape with minimal scratches and live to tell the tale. The story here isn't exactly anything special. It's about as Resident Evil can get. Get trapped in a location and stop the bad man from destroying the world with the deadly virus. In this case, deadly missiles. I mean, it's really all you can ask for. Although, there are some things that don't really make sense, like the fact that they try and say that Morpheus was the reason for the outbreak in Raccoon City, which simply isn't true. That title goes to good old William Birkin. I mean, even the movie got this right, which is very surprising. Other than that though, there's no real complaints. I mean, it's generic, sure, but for it being a light gun game, it's really not that bad. I actually like the dynamic of Fong and Bruce's relationship getting built throughout the story, and having to take down Morpheus. I think the setting is really cool too. It's not often Resident Evil gets set on a boat, and when it does, it's the worst part of Resident Evil 7. The cruise ship here is really nice and at times atmospheric. It brings back classic tropes like the claustrophobic halls and even the save rooms. None of the other gun survivors have a save room at all, so it's cool to see here. The theme is also really nice and chill, almost an aquatic feel to it, if that makes sense. Maybe I'm just delusional though. After the boat, the island declines in quality heavily. You have to sludge your way through deep sewage and make your way through a maze before you get to the lab. And the lab isn't much better. It's a lot nicer, sure, but it's so generic. How many times does there have to be a lab in these games? Like seriously. I guess the level design just falls short to the typical really strong start just to get progressively worse as the game goes on, which really sucks. If each area was as good as the ship, then this game may have stood out more and not just sit dormant in our memories. On a scarier note though, the horror isn't all too bad. I mean, I would hope so. This is Resident Evil, survival horror. I mean, it's not the scariest game, but it succeeds in getting some good jump scares. The zombies are a lot more menacing here too, not because they're scary, but because if you don't have the light gun, you will be genuinely fearing for Bruce's life as the zombies get closer and your shots just keep missing. As far as the gameplay goes though, it's good and bad. You play through the game in third person as you explore and find various items to solve puzzles. However, when you want to start shooting, the game puts you in first person, and this is where the game is ruined. Now, I've said it about 5 times at this point, but I cannot stress enough that this game is meant to be used with the light gun, but I did not do that, so I was sentenced to use the analog stick, and after doing that, I can confidently say, do not play this game without a light gun. I'll say it again, do not play this game without the light gun, or you could just use a USB mouse. It says on the box right here. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that either because emulation. Anyway, using the analog stick makes the game about 5 times harder than it needs to be. Every time you want to shoot, you'll have to awkwardly fiddle with the stick to try and hit the enemy. And you can aim when you move too, but that just makes it more awkward. You have to be in a claw position since the button to move while aiming is A, and God forbid an enemy is behind you, because turning around in this game is horrendous. 8 times out of 10, if an enemy is behind you and you try and turn around, the enemy is already on you, running your pockets. Also, if you use the AR, make sure you're not epileptic, because for whatever reason, they decided to make every shot an actual flashbang. I'm not even going to show the clip because it is that bad. Other than that though, the game is fine. The controls are really the worst part. If you can get past that, you'll likely have an okay experience. Just don't forget to turn off your brain while playing so you don't go mentally insane. As I said, Dead Aim is pretty much a regular Resident Evil game in all but controls. Honestly, this game just feels like a Resident Evil 4 prototype, but instead of Leon, you play as random US agent Bruce, and instead of the badass Ada Wong, there's Fong, who is slightly less badass. More accurately, this game feels like a fever dream. Right after you play it, you forget that you did. If this was just released as a normal entry in the series, it might have done pretty well. I mean, the story is generic, but the locations and the boat especially are really fun to explore. The soundtrack ain't that bad either. I mean, to be honest, the only one I remember is the save room theme. It's no Serenity, but it's still cool. Overall, I'd recommend this game. if you have a light gun and you're really into Resident Evil. But other than that, Resident Evil Dead Aim is extremely skippable and adds nothing to the franchise as a whole, and that's likely why it's now forgotten. I'm still trying to hit female Morpheus though.